Good evening.
Hey, how's it going?
So far, so good. How about you?
I'm doing all right.
Have you upgraded your OS yet
N-
on the
I've upgraded
Mac?
everything. I've upgraded. That makes for good podcasting. I've upgraded everything except for my Mac.
Okay. So I decided to be reckless and upgraded my Mac today. And so I was just taken
Sorry,
slightly
that
by
was more laugh
surprise.
than I meant.
No, it's well worth the laugh. But I was taken by surprise when the FaceTime window popped up because I thought the camera was coming on. And it did not. It
Oh,
just popped up the FaceTime box for whatever reason.
yeah. I have. I think I'm gonna be. I'm gonna have the most criticisms of Mac OS Tahoe. I there's a few things I'm still getting used to with the watch. You know, and I mostly like everything that I've seen on iOS. I My two complaints thus far is I have I guess my eyes are still young enough that I have everything on the smallest text size, and some of the smallest text is just a little bit bigger than it was in iOS 18. And I guess I'll, like after a couple of weeks, I'll have gotten used to it. But I'm just like, I'm noticing. I was like, I went to look and see after I updated, I was like, oh, did they automatically bump up the system text size a little bit? And nope, it's still at the lowest text setting. So some of the things with the keyboard, I'm not sure if I like the change. I wasn't looking for the keyboard to change. I like the old keyboard, but the new keyboard's not terrible. I like a lot of the animations, and I catch myself messing around with like moving stuff underneath the liquid glass elements. I think that's pretty cool. Um, and I wouldn't say I will say that they did, in most scenarios, they did make room for more content, and like especially like Safari. The only thing I kind of just my other main gripe besides text size is in Safari there's an extra tap to get to a few things.
Yeah, I noticed that as well.
I don't like it. It's not the end of the world. Maybe there's a workaround for it. Maybe it'll change, but um, it's not the worst. But I do like a lot of the things that came in. Um,
The unified phone view to me is also problematic because it takes extra steps to do certain things.
I've gotten lost in the unified phone view. I'm gonna stick to it for a few weeks and see if I can get used to it or figure out how I want to make it work. Um, so yeah, uh, it's still early. Um, uh, I thought I wasn't gonna. I thought well, we talked about this over the last yesterday and today, and I was disappointed that I couldn't get the waypoint watch face on my watch. And then you said you added it on your watch instead of just through your phone, and I did the same thing and found it that way. And I'm like, really, guys? Is that really? That seems
Yeah, it seems like a bug.
okay. I was gonna say that doesn't seem right because then when I opened up the watch app on my phone, it said, "Hey, look at the new watch faces," and that wasn't there after the update. So maybe your phone. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why, but yeah, I think you're right. It does. It's probably a bug.
There are a few things that I've noticed like that are, well, there are a few things across the different operating systems that have felt like there might be some issues with timing, maybe, or something. I can't quite put my finger on some of it, but symptomatically, that's the easiest one to point to as a very clear, hey, if I do this thing on the watch, then it shows me what it should have shown me on the phone. And that feels like it's just a timing thing. Make sense?
I think so.
Because Because
Like
otherwise,
there wasn't enough communication between the phone and the
that,
watch.
or like for whatever reason, whatever flag gets set to show you that prompt on the phone doesn't happen until after you do that action on the watch.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I don't know. Some of it's just different, and
It's
so
okay.
trying to figure it out.
I think somebody probably like, hey, why is this broken? And you know, you and I will never. I don't think you and I will ever see it, but it might get fixed in a point update or like a 0 point update.
And it wouldn't surprise me if there's some web trigger that actually does it. And so if you weren't, because of how quick or how overloaded things seemed, or maybe just how long everything took to download, maybe after the initial wave of updates, the timing won't be off like that. I don't know. Like I don't know
Oh,
what's
that's a good.
doing what.
You sound like you've like done stuff with software before.
In a previous life.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I gotta say that um, I really like the changes that they made to mail. I feel like mail has the changes that have been made to mail have really allowed me to uh, streamline my workflow in deleting all the junk mail that I get.
I don't really have any strong feelings about mail. I do think it's better on the phone than it was in that intermediary step with the um, was it slider or tags or whatever it was for the filtering in mail uh, things similar to the Google thing. I'm trying to remember what they called it, but the one where you had the filtering to like promotions or uh, everything else where you could tap on those across the top. You remember what I'm talking about?
I think so.
Because it's the same kind of thing that was in um, the Mail app on the Mac that is changed to mail categories is what they call it, where those were by default on, and it was trying to shove you to those instead of showing you all messages. Whereas now it's hidden behind a like menu option, and you have to toggle it on. So it's to me, it's better behavior out of the box than jumping straight to categories because I hate the category filtering.
Oh, I turned that off. I turned the category filtering off, and I still have list view set, so it never never switched to that. If I turn on category, yeah, I get how this works, and I get why. Um, I get how a lot of people will make that work, but it's not. It's not for me, at least not right now.
Yeah, same. And part of that might just be because I'm so accustomed to dealing with just everything, and I'll make custom rules for things that I want to do something else.
Oh, for sure. You have a long-standing workflow when there weren't when these sort of applications weren't feature rich in this way.
That's a very political way to put it. Well done. Um,
I feel like I've been around some software people and heard them talk about things.
yeah, it shows. Um,
Diplomatic, not diplomatic.
I think the only one that I really have strong feelings on at the moment is the Unified Phone app, and I think it's just because I need to adapt to it more than anything else. But the one thing that I don't like is it feels like I have to fumble around and tap multiple things to clear a badge notification if it's something that's not in the primary list. So like if it's a unsaved sender or whatever it is, I turned on that filtering, and it feels like I have to jump through two or three different things to find it where it wants me to find it, because it'll show it up as the like number of unread messages in two different places. And if I choose one, it doesn't clear it for some reason, which is another one of those things that feels like a bug. Um, I don't know. There's just something about it that I've got to sit down and figure out what the changes mean and whether maybe I need to make some settings adjustments or what. But it is not as clean as I would like for it to be. I'll put it that way. Like it looks visually cleaner, but it doesn't function as cleanly.
I agree, and it's going to be easy for me to stick with it and figure out a new workflow, just simply because I don't use it as much. It's not as I'm not in the phone app as much as others. And but I will say I had to force quit it and restart it today because it got stuck. It showed the screen feature, the screen calls feature, and I tapped on it because I wanted to try it, but and it wouldn't respond. And then it got stuck on that page. Like the page would move and it seemed functional. Like I didn't realize it was stuck until, other than the not responding to the screen calls. And then I was like, oh, where are my favorites? I want to place a phone call, and I couldn't find my favorites. And then I was like, that's not right. And so I forced quit the app and then restarted. It's like, oh, there they are. There. So there's some bugs there. Having listened to various podcasts, one, I thought the apps that were not updated to support the new UI would be more jarring than they are, and they're not. They actually, I think it's a lot more seamless than I think it's a lot more seamless than the podcasters would have led me to believe. And then there was something else that was, I don't remember.
So I want to jump in on that one because I saw something interesting from my experience. I've had a visual bug that I have not been able to squash, that occasionally the navigation bar at the bottom to navigate through the different views would become transparent. So the icons would still show up, but that bar wasn't there. I have not seen that happen since updating to this OS. So it might have actually fixed a visual element for me, which I would imagine is just based on the fact that I did everything in Swift and Swift UI, and there was probably something in that implementation that was a little bit buggy in previous iterations of the OS. So it's probably somewhat forward proofing, I guess, for my use case, but that was a nice discovery so far. Now, it might show up again in a few days. We'll see. But that was just one thing that I noticed that I was quite pleased with.
Oh yeah, that is good. That is that's a good it's a pleasant surprise.
And I have noticed, like, using other apps and then going into mine, it doesn't feel jarring at all.
No.
And so yeah,
I thought it was
same thing to what you were saying. Yeah.
Well, and that was that's kind of based on what other folks have said in some podcasts that I listened to, and I was like, it's not bad because there's no loss of functionality. There's no obvious I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. It's not ununified. It doesn't, it looks like it did in iOS 18 is what it is. It's like, okay, so and most of the apps, there's not really anything. I don't know. I was just in my head. I was thinking, is it gonna feel like, it's gonna feel like trying to. I'm trying to. The only thing I can think of is like when you had in Windows XP, if you had something that all of a sudden had the older UI in Windows, that did happen, and it was just like, oh, I forgot about how that UI looked, and it was like, just felt very old as compared to XP. So
you could think of it as the same type of transition when iOS 7 hit.
Yeah, that was definitely more jarring.
And I think part of it probably also just depends on how the developer chose to visually put together their app. I intentionally made the decision to be somewhat streamlined from the get-go. If you have enough legacy components, I could see it maybe being more difficult to make that switch.
Yeah, I think if you're using a lot of UI kit instead of Swift, that would probably. But I don't know that I have any apps that are. Well, I don't know. Obviously, I don't know what is the underlying, how it was written, and the technologies that were used and the APIs that were chosen. But it's, Swift's been around. We're 10 years at this point.
Yeah, I think it's been long enough that any serious developers have at least done some mixing of both, choosing what works best for the job. And I would expect a lot of the bigger ones have tried to migrate as much as they could towards Swift anyway, just for the performance improvements. So, but again, I don't know. Like I would consider myself an armchair developer compared to them, you know?
Right, right. Well, I was gonna say, looking at like some of the, like a big app like Gmail. I have to use it for work, and it already in iOS 18. It's not that it didn't fit in; it just had its own, more or less had its own custom UI, I think. And even if it was developed in Swift, it still looked like it didn't. It looked like Google, not Apple.
Right.
Whereas there are certain things from independent developers that are like, oh, this is very, in some in some cases there are apps that are like, you're doing a better job being Apple like than Apple.
Yeah.
So
It is funny how that
that is to
goes.
say, corporations, bottom lines, and revenue,
Speaking of bottom lines and revenue,
worshiping at the idol of revenue.
no, so a quick little side anecdote. Obviously, all year we've heard discussions about tariffs and everything else, and it appears they have finally actually taken effect because I ordered. You remember we talked about that third kit for Liverpool earlier,
Yeah.
and it finally was released, and so I had ordered uh, a jersey from the Liverpool store, and it shipped, and I got an email today from UPS indicating that I have essentially 50% of the cost of my package due in tariffs and duties with no breakdown of what they're charging me for. So this is going to be a fun exploration because on the one hand, I could just refuse it and tell them to return to sender and just lose my purchase price, or I could pay a 50% markup because I assume there's no negotiation or refusal of certain aspects of this, and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting ordeal to find out through. But I will be very picky about who I order from going forward for a while.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
it's not their fault. I don't want to make it sound like it's it is very much our government's fault. So
yeah, no, I was just gonna say, it feels like our government is like a like a troll demanding its pieces of gold or whatever. Somebody, it's like, you're this is unethical.
and so one of the things that annoys me, so it shipped from the Netherlands, which whatever it ordered from Liverpool FC, the store, the online store, but it's a European Union. Well, no, I guess it's United Kingdom now. Either way, there are agreements within the European Union, and so European Union countries, it's not surprising fulfillment will come from a neighboring country. But according to research, a tariff from the Netherlands should be capped at 15% for clothing goods. Now there might be some like wiggle room in within 5% depending on certain other subcategories and other things that it's all convoluted. But at most I should be looking at 20%, and they're currently telling me I owe 50%. And so it's going to be interesting to finally get a breakdown and see what money grubbing corporation is in the middle.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I'm sure there's some administrative fee since, I'm sure some other company is handling the intermediary dealings with customs because they could be contracted in to do it cheaper than other companies such as UPS or FedEx actually doing it themselves. Assuming they even could. Like, I don't even know what all goes into those handoffs and the logistics of going from one carrier to another and everything else. Maybe the only way to do it is through a third party, but that markup definitely stinks of, hey, we can get some money real quick.
Yep, it feels like modern day highway robbery. I keep wondering, when's it going to end? Because it looks like now the It feels like now we're the dog that caught the car and we don't know what to do. Referencing the release of the Epstein, what we've been calling the Epstein files.
Yeah, I don't even, like, at this point, I just have
I
no
don't know.
clue, you know.
Like, what's next?
Yeah.
What we expected to be there is there. So what's next? President Bartlett. All right, what's next?
It does feel like the all of the National Guard rhetoric is again trying to draw information or draw attention away from that and give you something more pressing.
Yeah, at some point it's all going. I mean, is it going to blow up or is it? I mean, last week we saw, another tragic, another couple of tragic shootings. But it's like one was treated very differently than the rest, and it's just like I've seen various folks responding, and it's just like I don't think you're paying attention. You just see the label and like, yes, that's a good label. I support it, and that's a bad label. I don't support it. And it's been wearing down on me.
I'm struggling just to contextually.
Yeah, I'm struggling too.
Like, it's, and we've talked about it a couple of times. Like, there's a certain point where I just have no clue what action to take next. It's I don't know. There's a whole lot of I have no idea.
We're in some respects, I feel like that we're on a roller coaster and we're stuck on it until it's over.
Feels more like a merry-go-round where you're strapped, like partially strapped, not completely strapped, just enough that you can't like let go and get off the ride.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like one of those spinny things that you're up on the wall or something.
Yeah, that works too.
Because you can kind of move, but the centripetal force is not quite allowing you to move the way you would want to,
and if you try to get out, you're just going to be flung and hurt.
Right, it's going to be worse. It's going to be way worse. Yeah, I think that's
a good analogy.
I think that kind of captures it. It captures it.
I was thinking of other analogies today for other things. This seems like it could be an interesting topic, especially since I have no other clue how to describe things. But especially over the past week, in different ways, you see different questions posed about don't understand why this group this or this group that or whatever, and you can draw all sorts of different lines. The specific question that I saw posed was pondering why people were opposed to like sending the National Guard in to help clean up crime type thing, and there are a lot of problems with that in and of itself, but immediately this analogy popped into mind, and I wanted to share it because I liked it. And it was similar to the idea of, you can think of the city being a person who has an infected wound, and it's some sort of cut or scrape that is like mildly bleeding, but it is not a life-threatening injury from the standpoint of blood loss. And the administration sending the National Guard in is like a practitioner offering a Bandaid to take care of the bleeding and completely ignoring the infection itself and saying, there, now you have nothing to worry about. And in this particular scenario, the Bandaid costs 5 times as much as actually the antibiotics to treat the infection. And it's such a perfect analogy that I almost typed it up and plastered it a bunch of different places and then decided, you know what? No, I don't have the mental capacity to deal with it at the moment with other stuff that I have to do.
I was going to say you'd be throwing your pearls to swine, and pearls being your time. Really, it's being your time. And because there's a willful rejection of, I don't even want to say logic, but just reason. Like, reason is being willfully rejected.
And this is part of why I like this analogy, because this cut or the scrape in that particular scenario would be a problem of some sort.
Right, something's being addressed.
Right. And so you can point to that and say, see, this is why we're doing it. And for most people, they hear, oh, I want to deploy the National Guard to help support crime fighting, whatever. And that nothing else crosses their mind because they have already had this fearful rhetoric that they've bought into about crime rates or not feeling safe themselves or whatever the case may be, right? There's some level of, yes, crime is a problem that I perceive as an issue that I also perceive as getting worse. When the reality is that it's not. It's just talked about so much and pointed to so often that it drowns out everything else. And so the prevalence of that discussion increases the prevalence or the perceived prevalence of crime. And this is classic textbook psychological manipulation at that point, whether intentional or not, completely irrelevant. The fact of the matter is that it is at a base level modifying people's perceptions in order to achieve an outcome that other people want. And it's, how do you really combat that? Because you can't say, no, you don't feel unsafe. I mean, that's just incorrect. We have no clue what that person feels. And if they do feel
Right.
unsafe, then that's very much something that's of concern to them,
Right. And, nobody can tell you that your feelings are wrong because your feelings are never wrong, but they may not, they may be based in misinformation.
Absolutely. And they can very much be grounded in a skewed perception of what actually is happening. That there is nothing that states that your feelings are driven from fact or reality any more so than anybody else's. And I think that's the piece that is lost on people. Just because you are more fearful of things doesn't mean that if you look at what's actually happening, it's worse than it was before. There is some level of objective measurement that can be made that can prove or disprove whether things are safer or not as safe. You could also say that when things are not as safe, they're worse than they were before, maybe. I'm not completely up to speed on all the different variables that you could try to spin it by. But it's very clear, even anecdotally, that things are not as bad as certain other parties proclaim them to be.
Right. So I think the thoughts that I have about this that are just kind of bouncing around like a pong in my head is I want to go back to feelings. I feel unsafe. I feel more unsafe. I was like, okay. If you're watching, if what information, and I want to be as gracious as possible. And let's say none of this is misinformation. This is all true information. But if you're being or if all the information that you're getting is crime, these are the crimes that are happening. These are the crimes that are happening, as compared to 20 years ago, 40 years ago, and and it's not as much. It's like, or you're not, people weren't inundated with 40 years ago weren't presented with as much in an absolute terms of crimes being committed. Then I can understand how you get to a place of like, I feel like there's more crime in the world. It doesn't matter that crime rates have gone down. I'm exposed to so much more of it happening in various places because of the 24-hour news network and the choices to present that. Yeah, I can understand how that feeling of lack of safety or a decrease in safety has happened. But if you look at the actual numbers, are you living in an unsafe place? Maybe you are. Maybe you did move to a less safe place than where you were before. But generally speaking, I'll just say in the United States, it's a safer place than it's a safer place than it was for a long time, or it's safer than it has been, or it's been progressively more and more safe. Maybe there are certain areas that aren't, but those don't have to do with policing crime. So it has all to do with policy, and people don't want to talk about that.
Yes and no. I agree. I'm not that one thing that I just want to add in.
You got more. You got more nuance.
Yeah, there's one other piece to also consider, which is depending on who we're talking about, because a lot of older people, if they have not moved, they've been in the same area for however long, crime does shift. I mean, neighborhoods shift. And so
yes.
there could also be, like, maybe you didn't move, but maybe crime has encroached more on the area that you lived in. And you can kind of make that a policy thing, and it could be driven from policy, but it could also be purely economical. And so I just wanted to add the caveat that there's the other category. Not that I just disagree at all. It's just that there's a little other piece that could also be a factor.
Yeah, I mentioned that you moved and maybe you moved to an unsafe place, but I should have said either you have shifted or the crime has shifted towards you, and that would have been that was in my head, but I didn't say it, and I appreciate you pointing that out.
And generally speaking, I mean, we have this misguided notion that crime is more migrant than it is, and that has not historically held true from a statistical perspective. It does move around some, but it still tends to focus on the same general areas or similarly adjacent areas. Like, crime does not typically get displaced in large geographical swaths. For example, if Hoover, just to use local terminology, if Hoover was always a relatively high crime area and a neighboring city of Pelham became more or higher crime, it's not because necessarily crime was moving from Hoover to Pelham. That's a big enough shift that it's probably not the case. It's more this series of blocks in Hoover, and it moved to another series of blocks in Hoover. It's not typically a large transfer unless there's significant organized crime.
Well, I think I think studies have shown that crime occurs in places of opportunity. And if a geographical location provides the opportunity, crime happens there. And then when you do things to that area that reduce that opportunity, then the crime doesn't shift like over a block or something. It doesn't shift to another nearby location. A lot of times the crime just stops happening there because there's no it's not an opportune place to commit a crime. So, a classic, maybe classic comic book crime location would be the alley. Why the alley? Because there's nobody there and there's nothing they can see, and people are walking by and maybe not directing their gaze that way. You close the alley, crime doesn't happen on the street anymore. It doesn't necessarily shift to the corner. No, it'll be the next available alley because that's a place that's now an opportunity, a place that's more opportune for crime. So while, to go back to I liked your analogy about the cut. When you have a cut, you have to treat it for the actual cut itself. You want to stop the bleeding. You want to close it up. If it's a very deep cut, it may need stitches or or the glue that they use now. The glue is great. But also, depending on what it is, maybe you need a tetanus shot. Like right now, all we see happening is like a show, a visual display of what's happening for, treating the open wound. We're not getting our tetanus shot. We're not getting our antibiotics because that's a thing that happens and then you don't see it anymore. It's something that's relatively, it's not for show, but it's what solves a problem. And in this analogy, like your tetanus shot or applying antibiotics or taking antibiotics is changing policy and bettering the economics of people's lives. Those are the things that end crime. That's what keeps you from getting infected and eventually having to amputate that area, or going into sepsis, or having some issue, further issues with that particular wound, because something left untreated is going to get worse.
And along the same or with the same thing, the piece that always baffles me And even if we weren't talking about National Guard, even if we were talking about just stepping up law enforcement activity,
just yeah, just standard policing.
You're still just treating the symptom. Like all you're really doing is taking a slightly more visible current issue and making it a much larger issue down the road when you deal with the extra load on the system and people's lives who maybe now are disrupted by, even if it's false accusations. I mean, that can absolutely create a ripple effect with now you have people who lost employment because of what turned out to be a misunderstanding or a problem, and there's no reparation, and now suddenly they have to turn to crime in order to make ends meet. I mean, there's so many different problems with this specific example that it's tough to even categorize them all. But at the end of the day, the main thing is just that it doesn't really matter if we're not doing something to actually treat the problem itself.
Yeah, and and we haven't even talked about our for-profit prison system.
I have so many problems with that concept.
It's like I said, this stuff has been dragging me down this week for sure. And because what we're seeing is a surprisingly large group of people that don't know how or value empathy, because they want to push everything to a place of black and white, and personal responsibility in a system that is setting most people up for failure, and the inability to consider, I guess this is like a different way of saying black and white, but the inability to consider the nuance of various situations.
It seems like I saw something similar not too long ago. Hell, at this point, we could have even talked about it, and I could have it mixed in with other things. As for everything that we've talked about in general, like just at a high level, the piece that's missing, the consistent issue, the consistent piece that's missing, is just a lack of concern about any viewpoint other than the one that you feel you know to be right. That's it. There is no discussion, there is no acceptance of information that doesn't prove that viewpoint, there is no willingness to even listen to the fact that there is some other viewpoint. It is formulating an opinion absent any other information other than what you choose to believe, and that opinion has to be right.
Mm-hmm. And then when you're presented with perhaps there's a different there's a different explanation, something that's more comprehensive and maybe a little more complex, because you know what, there's really nothing simple about human life. And then you go looking for the things and the people that agree with you and support the thing that you already believe, whether it's true or not. You're just looking for, at the end of the day, it's the bandwagon fallacy, where it's like, if everyone else agrees with me, then I must be right. No, that doesn't make you right. That just means there's just that many people that are wrong.
I don't know that I have anything to follow that up with. This has been one of those things that's been difficult just because it feels like we've talked about it for decades.
We've talked about it for half a decade, my friend.
I know we have.
We have literally. Let me rephrase this. We have recorded ourselves talking about this for half a decade.
Yeah,
and I'm sure that we've talked about it prior to that, and I'm sure that before you and I were talking about this, in some way, shape, or form, we were talking about this. So yeah, this has been. Well, my goodness me. We've been talking about this one particular. We've been talking about the current president, Trump, for a decade now. Over a decade now. He has infiltrated American politics for over a decade at this point.
Like a piece of, or what was, God, now I'm going to mess up the quote. Like butter spread too thin on a piece of toast. That's what it feels like.
Then, I was thinking he's it's been unflushable. It's just like that piece of shit that won't go down with when you flush the toilet.
Also works. I was just pulling the reference from The Hobbit instead.
Oh.
Well, I guess it was technically from Fellowship of the Ring, not The Hobbit, but
yeah, now I know what you're talking about. Who said that?
Bilbo.
Bilbo does say that? Okay. I read I don't think I've read The Two Towers or The Return of the King. I know I read The Fellowship, and that was 20 years ago.
Yeah, I'm due for my rereading of it.
I read The Hobbit 2 times. I read it when I was 16, and then I read it in my early 20s, and I loved it. I really did, and I can remember a lot of it. But I remember when I was reading I remember reading the Fellowship of the Ring, and I'm like, the movies are a lot. I like the movies better, and I know this is a bit heretical, but or blasphemous, but I like The Hobbit a lot more than The Lord of the Rings. As for the books.
I mean, I think I don't necessarily have any problem with anyone having preferences. You know, that's why they're preferences.
Right. I'm saying I like and not it is factually better or whatever. I'm sure there's a scholar who could say this is technically objectively better for these things, but this is just my opinion.
I don't know that you can really take Tolkien's works individually anyway, because he'd invented everything to support his works and then wrote stories. Like, it doesn't matter whether it's The Hobbit or The Silmarillion or The Lord of the Rings. It's all intertwined in some way. It's just which phase of time, really, do you want to read more about?
That's true. And also, it just occurred to me, I need to add that at the time, so I wanted to read, so after I actually read The Fellowship of the Ring, I think my senior year of high school, and then reread it after the first movie came out with the intention of reading it, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. And you know what I really didn't take into account, because I haven't tried reading it since then, but what I haven't taken into account is that I was also reading a lot of college books. I remember, let's see, 2000, so the Fellowship came out in December of 2001. So in the spring of 2002, I was taking mammalian physiology, genetics. I think I was taking Gen Chem 2, General Chemistry 2, and maybe physics. Either physics. No, I didn't take calculus at that time, but I think I was taking physics, and that might be why I really couldn't get into it. And it just never occurred to me about, thinking about the other things that were going around, because I was like, I read a book and it should always be the same. Nothing else is going on in life. It's in a vacuum.
I could see it certainly being much more difficult to read when you're reading other difficult material.
Yeah, and trying to retain it and get tested on it. And so I need to give it another go, because when I was reading The Hobbit, I loved it. And I loved how I can't remember anything that I didn't love about reading that book. Because my introduction to The Hobbit was I think we even have a picture on Instagram with this, but it was a 28-page adaptation of the 77-minute Rankin Bass animated movie of The Hobbit, and which is truly delightful. I've seen I don't know if you've seen it, but I've seen some people talking about it recently, and how much of the dialogue from the Rankin Bass cartoon was lifted from Tolkien's words, like word for word from the book. A lot of the script was that. And you know what, the narrator is an uncredited Sean Connery. It's the Rankin Bass style, and for me that is, even though what I'm blanking out, Peter Jackson presented for us is beautiful, it's still the image I have. Like when I think of Bilbo, I think of that drawing, that fat little hobbit. not Martin Freeman or I'm blanking on his name. Ian Holmes.
Sounds right. I'd have to look it up.
Ash from Alien. Anyway.
Yeah, I do think it's fascinating that generally, even though casting was great with the films, because I read it multiple times before the films, I can accept the casting choices and the characters without a problem. But visually,
But you have your own...
visually they're different, which surprisingly makes it easy to adapt to any other representation of them as well, I think. Because it's not that they're drastically different. The casting choices really do a good job of you not caring about any descriptive differences. Or at least for me, they do. So even if the description in the book was different from who was cast, the casting choices were so good, and seeing them act, in the roles was so good that I could accept any discrepancies without a problem as well.
I tend to agree with you for most characters. The one that I would say, like, I think that they got completely, maybe not completely wrong, but the one that I think that they got the most wrong was Radagast the Brown. I did not like his portrayal in The Hobbit. It's not how I pictured him. It's not. I think it was a little bit disparaging of the character. Maybe it's because I don't remember. Maybe it's more true to the character as how it was written, but I don't remember it that way. So, no, I did not like his portrayal. I think, on the other hand, I think that every portrayal of Gandalf has been excellent. Rankin Bass got it right. Peter Jackson got it right. Ian McKellen got it right. Top notch.
Yeah, I guess it's just because I only read The Hobbit once. And so I don't even remember enough of it to compare. I remember the story well enough, but I don't remember a lot of the details enough to compare to casting choices for the movies. Whereas I've read The Lord of the Rings multiple times, and so a lot more of that stuck with me to compare to what I saw casted. I also just often don't get fixated on the appearance descriptions, I've noticed. And I don't know how much of that is just because of being enmeshed in
immersed.
Yeah, I like enmeshed. It works.
Okay.
But yes, you can say immersed.
I haven't heard it. I haven't. No. I just hadn't heard the term in this.
But being in the video, just creative space in general, I wonder how much of that is what predisposes me to not being quite as concerned about descriptors as opposed to the other aspects of character. If the character can portray the character, that's more important to me than whether the appearance matches.
Yeah, so I can understand that, and for me, it's not. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's 50-50, but it is more along the lines of it's if the appearance is wrong enough, the portrayal or the portrayal, the rest of the portrayal may not compensate for that, and certainly if the non-appearance portrayal of a character is wrong enough, that will always be problematic. But there's no set ratio that I would say that has to happen. But yeah, there's and something that I can compare, how Gollum was presented in the Lord of the Rings trilogy is not how I pictured him. I had the Rankin Bass portrayal in my head, and when I read The Hobbit, because I saw or because I had the book so early on in my life, that's how I pictured it in my head, and it was fine. Rankin Bass, they presented something that when I read the book, I was like, yes, this fits. This is, there was no incongruency there. And then when I saw the movie, I was like, so now I have two pieces. I have what I read that was already reinforced with reinforced what I had already seen, And then when we get to Peter Jackson's portrayal of Gollum, I was like, none of this is wrong. It just doesn't fit what I had in my head. But I had no problems accepting it completely as this is who Gollum is here. And even though it was different than what I was expecting, what I had in my head, what I had in my head when reading the source material, it was just as good for the medium and did not conflict. Whereas something about how Radagast the Brown was presented did. And in that case, I only had what I read from the books or from The Hobbit.
I was trying to think of any other character that might be that divisive, but I don't. Like off the top of my head, there's nothing else that comes to mind, but I think it's only because there's not another series that feels like it was that foundational to its genre. I mean, maybe you could argue Star Wars, but nobody read books before the movies.
Well, there weren't books before the movies.
Well, that depends on... There were no published books. There's debate about whether there was source material and everything else and blah, blah, blah. There's a conspiracy theory, if you will, put it that way.
Fair enough. There's a I think I've heard something about this, but I'll come back to source material because I wanted to say one more thing. I think maybe the only other character that I know from Tolkien's works that has been as controversial was Tom Bombadil, or the lack of Tom Bombadil in The Lord of the Rings. And I'm familiar with the character from having read the first, from having read The Fellowship, but I didn't have a problem with him not being there. I get.
That's one that always, it surprised me at the outcry. I understand why you would be.
Like, he was an important character, but they tried to portray him through other characters.
Well, he was important in the scope of all of Tolkien's works more than he was specifically The Lord of the Rings itself. Now, yes, he was important. I don't want to take anything away from it, but you could tell the story without him, but you could not tell the story the way Tolkien envisioned it from, Hobbit through Silmarillion without him. And I think that's part of why the outcry was there, because he's pivotal to Tolkien's universe in many ways, but I don't feel like he's so pivotal to The Lord of the Rings. And part of it may just be that I don't really care if he's in there or not. Like, I love the character, and I love so many different things about him, but I also just don't care if he's on the screen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, because I feel like Peter Jackson did an excellent job of telling the story without him at all. Like, completely omitted in name, but not in. I mean, the spirit of Tom Bombadil was there, and very much in Treebeard. But no, it wasn't. It didn't take away from the story, other than if maybe he was your favorite character and you just wanted to see him visualized there. That's just unlucky.
Right. And interestingly enough, I assume you never watched any of the Rings of Power stuff that Amazon did, right?
Not yet.
So
I forget about it because Amazon is like the. Even though I haven't, I forget about Amazon being TV shows.
Yeah, I forget about them often too. But I watched all of The Wheel of Time before they canceled it. And
it's canceled?
I thought it was canceled. I thought I heard something about it being canceled. It may or may not be.
I know nothing. I know nothing about it.
I know that there was a movement to try to not have it be canceled, and I didn't follow it close enough to really care, to be honest. I never read the books either, so I am not a Robert Jordan fan. I know the books exist. I know it's drawing on source material, but I've never read them. So, but I wanted to watch the series because I wanted to see, at a high level what it was about. And I enjoyed the series so far. We'll see if it continues or was canceled. And I watched the first season of The Rings of Power. I have not finished the second season. I have many mixed opinions about it in general. What I would say at a high level is I think they did okay with it, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. Like the story elements are fine. There are other things that are, I don't know. There are some things that don't feel like they fit well, and some that do, and blah blah blah. I think everybody's going to have their own general response to it. But the people that I have talked to that are self-proclaimed Tolkien fans kind of have similar reviews, but it's all different things that each of them like or don't like. So I feel like it's very personal and subjective. So I don't want to go into any real detail there. But I say all of that because I believe it's Bombadil who is portrayed there. It's the only really explanation I have without really digging into the source material again, because it's been a really long time since I tried to read the Silmarillion. But it's the only explanation. It's the only thing that makes sense. And I think it actually, even in the episode, I think they do finally get to the point where he does call himself Tom. And if so, like it's a really good portrayal. And I like the way that he's brought in and everything's done. And it makes more sense for me there than it does in The Lord of the Rings. But at the same time, if you had someone actually embarking upon telling all of these stories as that same person, source of truth, where they got the green light to tell all of the stories and start from the beginning, then it would feel like a huge omission. And so I think it's another way of saying the same thing that I already said, but after seeing him in the Rings of Power, it makes more sense why you would feel that way in The Lord of the Rings if you were taking it as all of these things are interwoven. And because they now all exist in some visual form, it's tougher to make the argument against including him in The Lord of the Rings. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge when it was made and what context it was made in and everything else too. It's not as timeless as it is not truly timeless from the regard of what was chosen to be included and what was not. I would expect, if it was known for sure that the Rings of Power was going to come to pass as far as a television show or series, that there would have been inclusion of Bombadil in The Lord of the Rings, because it does make more sense.
Mm-hmm. And there's also more time.
Right.
Yeah. To explore those sort of things. So here's the thing that I just thought of. Let's say The Lord of the Rings had never, and The Hobbit had never been made into movies, and or let's say Peter Jackson's project was shifted 10 years later as far as the environment. No, let's say 15 years later, as far as the environment goes, 10 to 15 years later. So the 2010s, sometime in the 2010s. I don't think it would have ever been movies at this point. If the project had come up in the 2010s, it would have always been a television show, because you would have so much more time.
I don't know. Maybe this is. It's one of those things where it's really difficult to say, because if you have the other fallacy where you have enough time to tell things that you tell more detail, but then it feels too sluggish, or like you lose the audience because it's not, the pacing just isn't right to keep their attention. And so I think you could shoot yourself in the foot, so to speak, and like really fuck it up if it were done incorrectly as a series.
That's true. You're not wrong about that, but it's.
But I do think it would be fascinating to see it redone as a series.
I think they're doing well. So Warner Brothers is doing that for the other, Magic and
Harry
Wizards.
Potter.
Harry Potter. Thank you. I really like Harry Potter. I just couldn't think of the word.
I haven't paid a lot of attention to the news. I knew they were doing it.
I just know they're doing it. I have no idea when.
I'm interested. Like, I'll certainly give it a shot and see. I don't quite see why it's needed.
I thought the same thing. I was like, really? And it's just some real time follow up. It's set to release sometime in 2027.
Yeah, I thought it was still a little ways away. But it's just one of those things that it doesn't feel like it needs to be retold yet. Right. I may be pleasantly surprised by the time we get there, and maybe it's easier to retell because the straying from the source material and just the way it's done. Like, I don't know. I'm sure some thought was given to, you know what, it would be easier to redo this because of the amount of time that would be involved and following, set of kids as they age, blah, blah, blah.
Well, I think they'll age too quickly to, like, if you look, like, take for example Stranger Things. Those kids have aged too quickly for the pace that show has come out. I don't think you've seen any.
I have not.
So they've aged too quick. Well, they've aged pretty quickly for what's being shown. So, but to be fair, there were some, at least, some of this between seasons. There's like a year gap or more between a few of the seasons, if I'm not mistaken. So I guess it depends on the production schedule, because if they do a season every year and they do 7 seasons, maybe it'll work. But can you really tell the difference between a 17-year-old and a 27-year-old?
Not anymore.
Why?
I mean, if I was 20, 21, 25, something in that range, maybe. I certainly felt like I could then. Now all of them look like kids.
That's true. But I will say this. I can remember just a few years ago climbing with some folks, and they were in their mid-20s. They were like the oldest Gen Z. Like, they were the first year Gen Z. And I was like, I can certainly tell a difference between them and somebody who is like 17. Like, it wasn't, maybe not visually, maybe it was just maturity and conversation and so forth. But I felt like that was, they didn't, I could tell they were out of college. That they did not seem like high school kids. And now I am around high school kids. I have a high school kid. I know what that looks like.
Yeah, I can only imagine what it'd be like. I mean, eventually it'll be even worse because I'll be much older.
You'll be there soon.
But it is interesting because, like, right now, the only high school kids I would be around are those who also practice jujitsu.
Right.
It's a very different thing.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, 4 years ago, the only high school kids I were around were the ones that were in the climbing gym.
I guess you can, if you had a group of them, you could see some different patterns maybe. But because I typically train at lunch, the handful that I'm around are normally one-offs, not, a cluster of them. So I would imagine behaviors change when it's a group of them together and not just one high schooler among, a half a dozen or more adults.
Yeah, I think even like talking to the one high school, I can remember talking to the one high school kid, and it's like, I could tell just from you can tell that they're just not, they're thinking like a high school kid. They're thinking like a high school boy. So
it probably just comes down to difference in setting, because the conversations that we're having in the classes are typically very much focused on some specific aspect of the art itself and not life in general until afterwards. But then afterwards, it's your typical groups of people talking to each other,
Mm-hmm. Just some real-time follow-up as for comparison. Season 1 of Stranger Things came out in 2016. Season 2 came out in 2017, so no big deal there. Then there was 2 years between season 2 and 3, and then 3 years between 3 and 4, and then another 3 years between 4 and 5.
Yeah, I can see where if there's supposed to be, subsequent years, that can pose a challenge.
Yeah. We've got, they were literally 11 years, 11, 12 years old in season 1, and now they're in their 20s. So.
I can say, even with my concern about being able to tell the difference between like a high schooler and a 20-something years old, I can absolutely still tell a difference between like an 11 or a 12-year-old and a 20-something-year-old. Those don't look similar enough at this point.
They're not remotely the same.
It would be funny if I was old enough that I couldn't tell a difference between, all those damn kids.
Yeah, right. I liked it when I was a former coworker of mine who's 20 years older than me, in that range. Yeah, more than 20 years older than me. he's like, you're still a kid. I'm in my 40s. You're still a kid. I was like, I'll take it, man. I will take it. I saw that Robert Redford passed away today.
I saw that too. I hadn't heard anything about him in a while. I didn't look at cause of death or anything. I assume it was some medical issue.
The article I saw, they didn't specify, but he was in his mountain home in Utah, surrounded by friends and family.
I was chuckling because medical issue. Yeah, death is a medical issue.
Well, there's no more medical issues at that point.
But what I was meaning was, I assumed that it was a health related issue that led to death, not an accident or something.
I mean, he was 89, so it was probably probably something along the lines of, old age is no longer a valid cause of death. So but it's going to be something as uninformative, like cardiac failure. It's usually cardiac failure, because at some point something in your body fails in such a way that your heart can no longer beat. So that's what kills you. And so it's still just as uninformative as old age. And if you really wanted to know, you'd have to do an autopsy, but that's just like, not worth it. Unless you expect foul play, or you have some need to know, and sometimes some people have a need to know.
I was about to say the same thing. So,
I beat ya. I thought about was, it's fun. I'd watched a couple of weeks ago. Watched Sneakers with Jude, and he enjoyed that movie. I never got the chance to tell him that the CIA agent at the end of the movie was also the voice of Darth Vader.
Be a good piece of trivia for later.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I saw. Hold on. You made me think about. Yeah. I saw a thing that was talking about like Obi-Wan and Vader talking, and you remember the scene in A New Hope where Vader goes something along the lines of, "I was the pupil, now I am the master," something to that effect.
Mm-hmm. Now I am the master.
And the meme said, or had Obi-Wan chuckling after that, and then like Vader questioning, it's Master Vader, and so the follow-up panel was, that must be why he prefers to be called Lord Vader.
That's right. Oh man, my kids, they're the perfect age for that joke right now.
I can imagine. If I see it again, I'll send it, because it was hilarious. I laughed, and then I failed to save it before
Oh, I'm going to turn this into a joke for them, and it's going to be like, do you know why he get? Do you know why he? How it'll be something like Obi-Wan called Qui-Gon Master, and Anakin called Obi-Wan Master Obi-Wan, and do you know why everyone calls him Lord Vader? And I think one of them will say it knowing or not knowing, but then they'll figure it out as they hear it. And it'll be a fun moment. I gotta workshop that one a bit. We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work, or are interested in listening to our new after show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.